Tonight is just providing advice, just information, no legal or financial advice. So as we go through, just a little disclaimer there. I guess the aim today is to take you through this financial modelling process to ensure that you know exactly what you're up against from a financial perspective. It's probably one of the key things, and we're finding not too many clubs have actually done that today, which is surprising. It's critical that you can work through a variety of actions that come out from the bottom line outcomes and gives you the opportunity to bring other people in from your club at the current climate. And I guess at the moment you've probably worked through the shutdown phase, the planning and connection phase, the communication phase, and we're really starting to look at the reopening, but that's actually a separate webinar which we're going to run in a couple of weeks. That's actually more complex than what we're currently experiencing right now. Essentially, I'll just run through the implications that you're probably experiencing. We'll talk about the financial implications. We'll talk about the model and the spreadsheet. Very simple, and anyone should be able to go through that. Some very basic concessions and support that's available, where you can go and get assistance, and literally your action plan, where to from here. So we'll move forward. I guess the loss of connection with your members is probably one of the most important risks first up. I have heard of a number of clubs who have actually shut down and not communicated or even done anything at all. They haven't even held committee meetings. So that's pretty important, because really it's about all users of the club. That's members, as players, volunteers, sublessees, suppliers, sponsors. They're all users of the club. They all need to be communicated with. It's really, really important. You may be unknown as to actually how many players, members may in fact have enjoyed the break immensely, and do they actually want to return, especially coming in the middle of winter perhaps. So this is a particularly important one. There's been a lot of articles written about this, and many of you would have probably read those as we've gone through. Will that actually apply to volunteers as well? So there's some fairly big implications there between the two, because obviously volunteers, in terms of potentially using them to help you generate income, members are important, and players, because obviously that's income as well. So there's some financial implications with those two issues. For those who run a bar or have meal income, we're still a few weeks away from that. So that's been a fairly big item, I would imagine, from all the people I've spoken to in the clubs, in terms of the loss from your club. Sponsors is one, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Again, usually they're fairly important. They could be sponsors, or they could be just advertisers, similar sort of thing. What's the impact there? The fixed costs, there may well be some fixed costs. There may well be costs that you can offload. They're all implications that we'll just touch on. Obviously, stock on hand. Most of people that I've spoken to have literally offloaded anything that was perishable, beer and those sorts of things, or even food items. They've already offloaded those and sold them. Having monthly communication or committee meetings is absolutely essential. There's a lot of planning needed in this next phase, and even working out where you are. It's very, very important that you have that, because what you're also doing is actually communicating then with some sort of direction through to your members. So important that they understand that you'll still exist, that you've got a future, and you're actually planning, and you're actually operating in a very positive way. There's still a number of risks that still have to be reviewed in this whole process, not just financial risk. Just because the club rooms are shut up, there could still be risks associated with that. Insurance risk, and of course the financial risk. There has been a lot of information to digest. and you probably ain't seen anything yet with this release of opening up, and you can see even some of the confusion, even with today's announcement where we got cafes and restaurants can now operate with some limited capacity. Does that actually now apply to clubs? So we haven't had that clarification. So they're all the sorts of things that it's been very difficult to digest, and actually then communicate it to your members and your users of the club. And the whole mantra of communicate, communicate, communicate is just so imperative in this exercise. It all comes back in this whole sphere of planning. Now, the key thing here is a need to understand the shutdown impact of both revenue and your expenditure. So what is the bottom line this financial year? And it may actually be that you're actually going to run over 2 financial years. If you've got an end of financial year, as in June, 30th of June, you're actually going to have potentially half a year of some playing, half a year without. You may then move forward with a partial year not playing, and then maybe restarting later in the financial year. So in fact, you'll see on the spreadsheet, there's actually 2 sheets so that you can actually model this over 2 financial years. The other big one is a number of clubs don't do budgets, which as an accountant, obviously, I think it's really important that you actually do a budget, because you don't actually know where you're going without it. The spreadsheet looking for a budget amounts, but if you don't have that, then you can simply use your last year's financial report to put in both the revenue and your expenditure. So hopefully, as I say, that will do that. So let's just look at the spreadsheet itself. Essentially, you can alter all of these columns. It hasn't been locked down, it's very open. So both the revenue items you can adjust to meet your particular requirements and how you set up your profit and loss, or your revenue and expenditure statement. The remaining revenue is a percentage you put in, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Your budget amounts are then put in to that 3rd column, and then with the percentage and that amount, that will then suggest what the income, in this case, what your revenue might be for the year. So this particular club, their net income normally budget for around $60,000. They think there's only going to be about 30% of that actually received for this financial year, so therefore $18,000 is in fact the revenue item. There was some competition gate takings at the first part of the season, so that's why there's an amount there, but they don't expect anything further. Sorry, they're budgeted for it, but they don't expect any at all for this particular year. You may have actually received some, so therefore a percentage can go in there to include it. Donations, this particular club thought they may still get 1,000 out of the 10, so that's another issue there. So they've included that. Food, kitchen, they've estimated 40% of the 15,000 of what they generate from food and barbecues and the like. So there's about $6,000 received for this year. Fundraising, well and truly going to be off the mark with 10% against that. Grants, at this point in time, there's all the, particularly the people who have been providing the grants, are normally not asking for those back. It's only the major ones where there's building work and some delays, then you'll need to go back to, like Rec and Sport and talk to your the industry liaison officer about that issue. But most of the time, the grants won't need to be repaid. And it goes the same with the like of sports vouchers as well. Membership. This club are anticipating a 20% drop-off, so therefore they've used 80% in their number of 16,500, giving them 13,200 for this particular year. Merchandise sales, regalia, merchandise, whatever it's called, they think there's been there won't be much take up on that. And in fact, they actually sold some of their previous stock. So just to try and get it out so that they got some cash flow into the bank. They normally have courses they run, so there's no income going to be received from that because they haven't been able to hold any courses. The venue hire is the same. They normally raise about 15,000 from venue hire, and so therefore they're not expecting any income from that. So in this particular case, they're about 93,000 down on budget against what they expect to come through. So it's fairly straightforward to put that those numbers in. So from an expenditure point of view, they've elected to retain the 100% and continue to, and I use advertising quotes because it's around about how they may be doing it. So maybe some Facebook, there may be some supporting a particular publication, and they think it was important to maintain their face of the club within their community. So that's why they've retained it. Exactly the same on the revenue also. You've can alter your revenue items to however you use your, how you set them up, your percentages you put in, and again, you put your budget amount. As I mentioned before, if you don't have a budget, then you can put in last year's expenditure. This particular club did have some affiliation and umpiring fees, but only about 20%. So therefore $200 will count in terms of an expense. Slightly less on bank fees. There's not the purchase over the bar. There's not the purchase of the food and the like. So therefore their credit card expenses were less. So therefore their bank fees were less. Committee expenses, they've continued. Slight drop off there, so they put in some savings from the committee point of view, so around 80% of those costs. With the liquor licensing, food and health, there's no offset for them because they've had already spent those, so therefore there is no reduction in that. There is some liquor licensing reduction will come through if you have a liquor license, but it only applies to the 2020-2021 financial year, not the year just currently we're in. Insurance is an interesting one. It's really important, I think, to go back to your broker or your insurance company and ask them what concessions might apply if you're continuing in the lockdown situation. There's still obviously risks associated within the insurance area, but as all of these things, it's important to go back and ask them what concessions they can potentially provide. In this case, there's no match fees. There normally is fees, but they won't incur any of those costs. They haven't purchased any merchandise for the year. They've offset that. In terms of premises, they've reduced their cleaning because they were in a lockdown situation, but they think that'll alter by about 50%. The electricity and gas, they had some part of the year, but they've shut it all off, turned off the electricity and everything. So there's no, they think there's about a 50% savings. The council, in this particular situation for this club, there was a 3-month reduction in the lease costs, so therefore they save around that $1,800. There's some reduction in the office cost stationery because it's not operating at the normal way, so therefore the printing costs and stationery and other things are reduced. Phone and internet at the particular club rooms has reduced as well because most of the internet costs now are being borne by the actual volunteers on the committee generally. Repairs and maintenance has been reduced. There still needs to be some done, but they think there's a saving of about $900 in this particular example. Security is maintained at 100% purely because there's greater risk with people not actually being in the club rooms. So therefore you still want to have that security person going around and checking. Obviously there's water costs. They don't have to do any watering of the oval and the like. Sundry costs, whatever they may be in this particular case, but they've estimated there's a significant saving there. They've retained almost half of the training costs purely on the basis that this is a great opportunity during this quiet time for, in fact, the officials and their umpires and the like to actually do some additional training, and they were happy to pay for that, knowing that at some point we're going to come out. So this is a great opportunity to provide the extra training for them. There's the saving in trophy and prizes this particular year, and obviously the volunteer costs are reduced. So there's about a $38,000 saving between what they thought they would spend to what they think they'll actually spend. So in terms of a bottom line, they're actually, and there's $800 who spent on capital expenditures, there's about $7,000 they're down in cash flow terms over this particular year to 30th of June. So the question is, how do we overcome that $7,000? Where do we come up with it from? And this is why it's so important to do this very simple sum to actually then work through what are we actually going to do. So in this case, they've got $3,500, $4,000 in their bank account. They did pick up $2,000 from selling off old stock and $500 from various pieces of merchandise. In addition to that, their state sporting organisation chipped in $1,000 to help them out. So there's about a $1,000 shortfall they've currently got. Now they've worked through, they did have a bit more in cash that they were able to find. So they've actually been able to, they think, literally come out in terms of a zero net position in terms of the cash flow for this particular club. So in this particular club's situation, that's actually a really good result. I've seen others where there's still a $30,000 shortfall and it becomes quite significant. But the fact is you can deal with something if you know what you're actually dealing with, as opposed to a number of clubs don't know, in fact, what they're actually dealing with. Okay, there has been some concessions that have been provided. Consumer and Business Service have allowed for the AGM deferral for 6 months or so. They've also allowed for electronic meetings for the board and committee and circulatory motions, even if they're not actually contained within your more contemporary constitution. Lots of old constitutions out there don't allow for it, but they have allowed for that dispensation. There's a number of new grants and fundings that have come through. And it's really important that you keep track of those. And on the next slide, there's a number of websites that you can track. Sport SA have got a particularly good page that lists all the grants available that you can fund. And even your own council, there's a variety, whichever council you might be in, there has been a number of both concessions and potential grants that are being available. A pretty strong one at the moment is still, there's usually funds available for training purposes, so don't discount that part of it. There may even be grants now available for setting up for hygiene purposes, your sanitizer stations and the like, or additional cleaning costs. So again, it's important to talk to them. I've talked about sports vouchers. There's the JobKeeper package for those who are actually employing. The small business grants, again, only if you're employing staff is that available. And I've talked about the liquor licensing and the council's COVID packages and the like. In terms of sponsors that Andrew asked me about, the key to all of that is really to talk to them. Again, a number of clubs I've spoken to have literally just switched off and said, oh, we can't because we don't know what's happening. Well, the important thing is to actually go and talk to them. You can still have meetings with them and show as a club that you care about them. Particularly if they're a long-term sponsor, it's so important to say, we as a club, you've supported us. We want to support you. And what can we do? But it's understanding what position they are in. Are they in a situation where they are desperate? Are they in a situation that they've been able to maintain the business. You need to understand that, because at the end of the day, it's asking the question, how could they or your club best help them? And again, depending on the type, so if it's a fish and chip shop, as an example, a takeaway, well then obviously the encouraging all members to support their local community, support their local sponsor, and go and buy the takeaway from the particular shop. So it depends on the business to how best you might be able to assist them and support them. Depending on long-term, short-term sponsor, then it might well be that you're able to tailor the package differently for a period of time. So is it that, they say, well, we can only do half, but you're not going to sort of throw the hands up in the air. You say, well, even if you can do half, that's fantastic. We're happy to keep your signage up. We're happy to do that. We'll continue to support you and encourage our members to support you. So it's a relationship-based approach, and that's probably the key that I've been highlighting to all the clubs that I've spoken to over this issue. So assistance is available from a variety of sources. Always important to go back to your peak body. They should be the ones providing you with the clarity around the legislation, what you need to comply with. You need to talk to them if you have financial difficulties. In terms of that, you must talk to them. It's really important. We talked about the SA government, the job support package. There's the sa.gov.au, really important as the source of information. The Rec and Sport website homepage, really a good one there. The latest news in that particular link I've got up there. There's a frequently asked questions also on the Rec and Sport site. I talked about Sport SA. I've got a really good list of all grants available from a variety of different sources, from Australian Sports Commission through to the local government and the SA government and the like. So important to look at that particular one. And again, this particular presentation, if not everyone can get to it, you'll actually be able to see that it's being recorded. And for any clubs within the Onkaparinga local government area, you can actually view that this particular presentation on the OpenNet website now. That was done a few weeks ago. Where to from here? Again, so I can't emphasize enough to talk to your peak body, whoever they may be. Complete the financial model, and that would normally be your treasurer who would do that. And then the treasurer would then bring it to a committee meeting. Remembering, as always, the treasurer is not the sole custodian. The whole committee have to take responsibility and have legal responsibility for all finances within the particular club. So the treasurer would table it at a committee meeting with suggestions on what or how that can be offset in terms of the cash flow, and you would work through that. And there may be some particular things you need to do to create a solution. If the committee don't have time, maybe there's a whole variety of volunteers that are actually out there looking for something to do, and it gives you a great opportunity to try and get some other people involved, and may even help with your succession planning by getting them involved. Once you've reviewed those, you actually create the action plan to implement them. Really important. Keep communicating with members. Talk to them about what the situation is. Don't try and hide anything. You need to be as transparent as possible. This is a crucial time to maintain the culture, a positive culture in your club, and this is how you can actually do that. So, thank you for the time this evening. We'd love to know if there's any more resources that you would like to help you at this particular point in time. We're also keen on the email response to see how you found the webinar. If there's anything else we can do to improve the delivery of that, we would love to hear from you, and you can respond directly to email. to Rachel via the email that you'll receive, and she will also be on there how you can, if you're looking for more information or assistance, then how you can do that. And there's the information for that will be on the email that Rachel sends. So we've looked like there's a few questions there coming up, Rachel. So is there any group ones? Perhaps
just a couple that have come through. Okay, just a couple that have come through. One from Andrew was the cost versus benefit of playing games without spectators regarding the revenue. Yeah.
It's hoary chestnut, that one, Andrew. It's what I think it's highlighted with the clubs that I've spoken to is, in fact, there's a need to probably review your financial or your model for the club. I think it's difficult when a club is totally reliant on the gate takings to, in fact, then provide the cost to actually run a game. One of the biggest ones that I've heard, particularly around the football, has been around player payments. And I know PK from ABC was another proponent of this. Is this an opportunity to really look at this and say, do we need to be paying that level of payments to people who want to play football, as an example? I know I come from an era in basketball and hockey and everything else that I had to pay for the pleasure of playing, and I never received anything. But there's an inequity thing between a lot of the female sports and the male sports, where female sports aren't getting paid for participating. They're doing it for the right reasons. So I think it's important that a club uses this opportunity to seriously look at their strategic direction around finances, about how do we generate our revenue, and do we need greater diversification of that revenue. It's a tough one, but one of the best opportunities you'll ever have to affect change is in the middle of a crisis. It's a wonderful management theory. I've done it in corporate quite a few times, and it's worked very well. So now is your opportunity. If you need to affect change, do it now. But certainly your model needs to be in a more broader basis for your revenue. And I'm seeing that with clubs who are struggling generally, that their actual revenue base is very myopic, and they do need that greater diversification.
Thank you, Tim.
Rachel.
We have another one from Emily, West Torrens Cricket Club, and she said, we probably don't qualify for the SA small business grants as we do pay our coaches, but not with wages, group certificates as such. Often it's more an honorarium. Our main coach does include his income taxation for the year. Do you know if there's an option for us? Most of our funding comes from SACA, which will certainly be down this season.
Yes, no, I actually went back to the office, SA government, and asked that very specific question. It has to be pay-as-you-earn style salaries. Without that, there is nothing available. So it's really quite clear. For the clubs, there's not as much. I think it'd be fair to say that there's an expectation of the community picking this up, particularly around the probably regional. They're looking for the community to help chip in a bit more on this, and that's why you may have seen a number of innovative funding opportunities, online funding opportunities that have come up. In fact, where a club has gone back out to the community to look for financial support, and there's some online mechanisms for that. But unfortunately, in this particular one, you won't qualify.
Great. We have another thank you for you. We will send out the presentation plus the checklist and the spreadsheet. So had a comment, I think it's presentation. And what's the best place? Could you just repeat the best place for grants?
that was Sport SA have a particularly good site that lists all the grants from not just one source. So Sport SA, if you just type in at your Google there, Sport SA COVID-19 and follow it from there, that pops up really, really well.
Excellent. And another one from Sylvia, when can we serve food on club grounds?
Well, that's the big question. I think today's announcement is a fantastic, early start to that. I mean, the fact that cafes and restaurants now can go, we're waiting for probably more detail. We've only had really a press announcement at this stage, so I think in the next couple of days, it's very important that you don't get this wrong, because the fines would wipe out any possible revenue you get from that.
Yeah, once permitted, would canteen takeaways eaten in cars be acceptable? Well, that's sort of hooked up with what you're...
Well, that is, again, we've just got to wait for more information on that. I know everybody, it's a wonderful opportunity to again, generate income. And it may well be, again, this is one of those classic cases of, if you think about running a canteen, where you may have been offering something inside, and then there's the additional costs of both serving, cleaning, washing up, and all those other things, is in fact the next stage for this, that you actually, it continues as a takeaway and people sit in their car. Now, obviously there's a cultural issue there because you want people to socialise, but is the new norm not socialising or not being allowed to socialise in the way we've done in the past? So does that, again, as Andrew asked, that cost-benefit issue again, is that something that you can provide some takeaway? People go to their cars, and in fact that actually provides more direct income than the cost behind the scenes in providing it and providing that sit-in area. So all of this, again, comes back to that premise that you understand what your financial position is. You're actually going to, in doing this process, you'll actually understand your, the whole committee should actually get a better understanding of your budget, because they're going to want to go into every single line. And therefore, you're actually going to re-strategize around your financial well-being, as financial sustainability of the club. And that may mean, as I mentioned before, taking some hard decisions, but it's probably a really good opportunity to do this going forward.
Thanks, Tim. We also have one from Tara about some clubs have re-engaged old members of their club, asking for a $20 or $40 donation if they can afford it. And also I've heard of a reduced membership or a social membership, asking older former members to rejoin. Yeah.
The old scholar sort of network from the school, isn't it? And again, I tie in with the, I'm trying to think of the name that I saw today. If anybody actually hooks in on Clearinghouse for Sport, that regular daily information that comes in, there was a particularly good article, which I haven't got in front of me, as I say, using that, where they're actually trying to gain funding from the engaged community using the online system and their online network. And that's part of this thing with the $20, $40 donation that Tara's just raised. It's an opportunity. And the other one, of course, is that just because we now don't, we can actually meet for, well, partially meet for, certainly for training and the like, does that mean that the online income generation, you know, like online bingo or online games and the like that a club can do, does that really need to stop? Maybe the new norm, in fact, is that you actually have an online component in terms of you diversifying your income, becomes the new norm as well. So let's not walk away from the enormous inroads we've made to engage with members and users of our club in an online way, let's not use that. Let's in fact perpetuate it. Let's expand on it and use that to start to diversify that income base.
Thank you.
I was just reading the one from Emily.
Yes. Yes. So that, I'm not sure if everyone can see it, but would any former players from West Torrens who are on the panel be keen on making a donation through a Australian Sports Foundation for new women's change rooms and training facilities? Oh, you're registered.
Yep. So that's a general one. I've just read the one from Wayne. It is a difficult one, and various clubs are having different situations, Wayne, in terms of their membership. The very proactive clubs have already initiated a deferral on the membership. I know they have actually had good cash flow. Well, not good cash flow. They've actually got a good bank account to make up for the loss in cash flow. But there's no question that there will need to be a whole variety of options around how members might be able to pay their fees because of varying situations. This is where it highlights being in communication with the members, having a feedback mechanism and understanding, is there 3 or 4 groups of members that exist within your club, for example, that you think, well, okay, basically our membership fits into 4 categories, therefore we think behind the scenes we may have to come up with 4 options that are not necessarily defined, but we can actually work with those people from those varying groups that fit that particular situation. So it may well be a deferral, it may well be the payment plan, it may well be that there's no fee, but you really want to retain those members, because generally this sort of situation where you help someone out in difficult times, it actually creates really great loyalty. And if you've then got or creating this wonderful cultural aspect of your club in this really difficult time, then you've got the capacity to build huge loyalty and a really positive cultural aspect. And I think having a variety of options within the in your membership fee paying area is really important.
Do we have any more questions that people would like to ask?
Perhaps highlight that one from Ashley, saying that if there's any netball clubs listening, please, they can definitely reach out to Netball SA. You know, they're very switched on, and their new CEO I've worked with before, and you know, it's fantastic, and they really do understand the grassroots club. So yeah, that's a really great endorsement.
Thanks, Ash.
So do we have any other questions there which Rachel asked? Again, you may, a whole heap of these questions may come up once you see the spreadsheet and see the presentation. Brent's just asked a question. Yes, the actual presentation has been recorded, and that'll be available on the Reconsport website, which Rachel will advise how to get that on the email to you, Brent.
Not a problem.
So no others, everyone's ready to go and have their dinner and a glass of wine. Or should I say Milo?
I'd just like to add, really appreciate your time attending, to you, Tim, for the presentation. And we've secured Tim for another couple of weeks, the next two Wednesday nights. Next week, we're running a webinar on planning in a crisis, and the following Wednesday, 3rd of June, will be governance in a crisis. So yeah, it's really good that Tim's been able to help us step us through some different topics and actually reach out to the clubs. So we're covering a lot of clubs out there.
I think it's probably important to highlight the governance one is certainly how to meet your legislative requirements in a crisis is probably even I only thought of that this afternoon, Rachel.
Yep.
It's probably that horrible word governance. I mean, we who love it understand it, and but I know most clubs think, oh no, we don't, governance, we don't want it. But yeah, no, that'd be good.
Great.
So we'd appreciate that, Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah.
So probably no more. We'll.
I guess if you have any other questions, feel free to email me and I can follow up, Tim. That's not a problem.
Yeah, and that'll be on the email you send out to them anyway.
No worries.
Yeah.